Welcome to the Filmcast review of The Boy and the Heron. I'm going to read the plot summary from the internet. Mahito, a young 12-year-old boy, struggles to settle in a new town after his mother's death. However, when a talking heron informs Mahito that his mother is still alive, he enters an abandoned tower in search of her, which takes him to another world. End quote. Devindra Hardwar, I think you're the hardest core Miyazaki fan here on the podcast.
Pretty hardcore.
This is going to be probably his final film. He hasn't made a film in like a decade or so, and it is also the #1 movie at the U.S. box office this weekend. So what a crowning triumph for that career. Somebody who's given our culture so much creativity, so many memorable stories, films, characters. The Boy and the Heron, interesting movie. Weird movie in some ways. I'm curious, what did you think overall of this film?
Yeah, I think this is a tremendous movie. Like, it's tremendous in how it's an exploration of grief and trauma, but it's also like it's sort of like wrestling with what we leave behind, especially what maybe a supposed genius could be leaving behind to the next generation. It is kind of like every Ghibli movie that Miyazaki has made kind of wrapped up in one, because there are elements of this. So many of his films are about people being transported to another realm, but also kids worried about their mothers, or issues with their mothers and their health or their potential death is always a running theme for him. The issue of World War II and kind of his own personal family guilt. The Wind Rises was tremendous, like fully about that basically. And I think everybody was ready to just look at The Wind Rises as like, that is actually the perfect way to cap off your career, because you've done all this fantastical stuff. Here's a grounded movie that is directly wrestling with things that your family was a part of, and his own personal guilt for basically profiting from World War II. It is fascinating.
And we should point out that The Wind Rises, I don't think had any fantastical elements as far as I can recall. Like,
not really.
There was like dream sequences, right? But there was nothing like
there's
magical world or
the earthquake that was depicted in that movie had like a really cartoonish look, but that was it. Like, that was a really grounded film.
Yeah.
And I think like people gave that a lot of credit. I was like, man, look at this guy who's done all this fantastical stuff.
Yeah. Now bringing it back down to earth now, right? But now this movie is like an interesting.
This movie is full fantasy. And honestly,
by Earth.
By Earth. I mean, listen, this movie kind of has everything though. Like, it has the beautiful fantasy worlds that he can create, including like using animals in ways that I never really thought of, but it is funny. It's kind of sweet and endearing what it does too. The sort of like dream logic, or the logic of his narratives always takes a little getting used to as well. So if like you apply like, oh, why is this person motivated to do this or do something like that, it doesn't always work. But I do think like on a fundamental level, on an emotional level, this movie hit me really hard, just in terms of like what he is discussing here. And we'll talk about some of the stuff in spoilers. But I think by the end of it, I was just kind of walloped by this movie, because here's something that's essentially about a boy dealing with the death of his mother, going on this fantastical journey. And then it ends up being kind of about everything. It's a thing that comes up in the book, but it's about how you live. It's about how you move on and come back to a world that is shit, which is, hey, a thing we're all thinking about right now. But it is about like trying to find the beauty among the garbage and the awfulness of the actual world. That's something we'll talk about in spoilers. But yeah, I was walloped by this movie. I also want to point out, like, it doesn't look like any Miyazaki movie we've ever seen, because for the first time, he has actually like let other people do stuff. And this is a guy that is notoriously very much like on. He's hands-on all the time. Like, if his underlings are not animating things the right way, he will just like push them aside. He has fired people. He's known for having a bad temper. Like, he just wants to do it all himself, maintain full creative control. And in this movie, from the very first scene, which covers like I don't know if it's a firebombing, but the hospital where his main character's mother works is on fire, and he is just running through the streets.
It's an incredible sequence, and apparently he got someone else to help animate that sequence, right?
Yeah. So he got help from a whole bunch of people. Like, I just want to shout out a couple names here, like Takeshi Honda, who worked on the Evangelion series and movies, like is a well-known animator. Did a lot of work in this. Toshiyuki Inoue also worked with him on Kiki, but also worked on Akira and a bunch of other things. So it is fascinating to see, like, after all this time, the guy that has wrestled like full creative control for himself for so long is letting go a little, which is also kind of a theme of the movie too. I think is fascinating to see. So yeah, I love this movie completely, and I saw the subtitle version. I love it so much. Like I want to see how the dub works because I just want to hear Robert Pattinson's weird Heron voice. Apparently, he's doing that. Like he's really taken on from Defoe. Like just weird little roles, weird little voice roles. So I kind of want to see what that sounds like. Yeah.
It probably sounds like his Batman.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like Defoe in The Lighthouse, probably. Like we heard a bit from the trailer, so I kind of want to hear that.
His Heron sounds like this.
It does. It does.
The city needs me. Okay, Jeff Kanata, what did you think of The Boy and the Heron?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say what I thought of The Boy and the Heron is best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Interesting.
So gorgeous, I found myself staring. Miyazaki is beyond comparing. The techniques employed means that I enjoyed this boy and his weird little heron.
I thought you were going to do a
Well played.
rope-a-dope and like
Yeah,
not
yeah,
have a
yeah.
rhyme with Heron at the
Yep.
end, and that was
See,
going to be
that
great.
was the rope-a-dope, because now you think I'm all about rope-a-dopes, and I clearly can't drink the one in front of me.
Nicely done, Jeff. Nicely done.
Yes, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Devindra said. For me, the joy of this movie primarily is the visuals. It is sumptuous. I mean, every single frame, I found myself falling into the backgrounds and just staring at the backgrounds, the painterly backgrounds. There's so much detail. There's a scene very early on in the movie where people are walking down a street in front of some buildings, and their reflections are in the windows of the buildings.
Yep. And the camera's also panning with them. So there's like layers of animation there. It's
so stunning. This movie is gorgeous. The painterly backgrounds. I couldn't help but think of all of the work that went into every frame of this movie. The movement of the characters, the way the way the characters are depicted, the angles that we take, how they move through the space. It's all of a level that we just don't see with hand-drawn animation anymore. And to be able to witness that level of skill moved me. I mean, there's so much care and so much attention to detail that is taken in this movie. I was agog at the artistry of it. I think for me, it is much more of a tone poem than anything else, a meditation, if you will. That the individual elements didn't particularly add up to anything conscious, but it works kind of on a subconscious level. It didn't feel to me like it had as much coherence is the wrong word, but it didn't have as much of a spine, perhaps.
Yeah,
as,
I feel the same way, Jeff. I think I agree completely with you. I think like I was trying to put my finger on how to describe it. I think like the storytelling feels very non-linear, is how I would describe it.
It's almost dreamlike, right?
Yeah,
and much more so than other Miyazaki films. So many of my favorite of his films do feel like fairy tales, right? But done in a very particular way. But fairy tales nonetheless. This does not feel like that to me. It feels much more meditative and much more subtle and vague and kind of and dreamlike. And that isn't to say I didn't enjoy it. I just don't think it is as direct or I also struggle clearly with how to describe it, but it worked on me. I kind of let the movie wash over me and the visuals wash over me. And I just felt like I was enveloped by it. And there's so much, right? There's so many, like with all of his movies, so many beautiful visual ideas on display, right? He's always about these iconography images that stick with you. And there will be sequences from this that will be stuck in my brain forever, right? There are sequences that are so haunting, so beautiful, or just so sort of pure and light, that they strike some sort of subconscious chord, right? It's touching on something that's a little more primordial, right? It's a little less direct and conscious and more sort of deeply felt. And I don't know many movies that are able to do that kind of thing. And I think it's a quality of the artistry on display. And yes, all of the things Devindra said are correct in that there is a textual reading of dealing with grief and worried about your family, all that stuff. But for me, that sort of receded, and more of what I was feeling was this sort of like being in an ocean of feelings and being in this thing that's kind of happening all around you. It's an extremely beautiful movie, and I think an amazing achievement. Obviously he's, in his 80s.
He's going to be 83 in less than a month. It's wild.
Yeah. It's sad to me that this may be the last of his works, and I hope Studio Ghibli continues on, and it'll be interesting to see what it will be without him. But this is not the kind of artistry you get often, and it is really beautiful.
I think I almost agree with pretty much everything Jeff said, which is that this is one of the most gorgeous animated films I've ever seen. Many of the sequences are really memorable. We already talked about the opening sequence, but I was like, right away in the first 5 minutes, I was feeling I have never seen anything like this, anything animated like this, illustrated like this. It just feels really unique and special. And of course, it's fantastical and wild, and I love the imagination. It's about this boy and his goofy, strange, weird heron, and it's like, well, what a weird idea. And I know a large portion of the story is also autobiographical for Miyazaki as well, and I do think, yeah, it's kind of one of those stories where it reminded me of like the movies I watched when I was a kid, like The Never-Ending Story or something like that, like kind of these fantastical adventure movies. I think I'm probably slightly more negative on it than Jeff is. I think I found the storytelling to be frustrating. Non-linear is kind of. I don't think that's even the right word, right? Like as you said, Jeff, I'm still searching.
I think dreamlike is a good one. Like
dreamlike.
Yeah.
We're basically in a typical narrative structure. One event leads to the next event, right? Like, oh, something happened and it caused a thing that results in the next thing happening. And that's not really the logic that we're dealing with in this movie. Like, stuff kind of happens. Characters show up because it's time for them to show up, And I find that kind of thing a little frustrating personally from a narrative perspective.
That's kind of how Alice in Wonderland works.
Yeah. Yeah. Another book that I just freaking despise. No, I'm just joking. I don't hate Alice in Wonderland. But yeah, it's very similar. It's like has that kind of logic.
The Mad Hatter is here. Why? Because that's when the Mad Hatter is here. There's no like.
Yeah, but also I don't know that people remember Alice in Wonderland because of how tightly the story is constructed.
Right.
They remember it because of all the fantastical ideas and creatures and so on. And that's how I feel about this movie. Is like,
agreed.
Not necessarily the story that I love, but it's more like, oh, the ideas are amazing. Like there are these things called the wara waras, I think is what they're called. They're these little dudes. Vulture.com had this cool article about all the
little dudes,
all the cute little dudes, all the goofy little guys in the Miyazaki movies, right? And the
sweet little puffalumps that are always showing up.
I think they actually represent souls in the movie, if I'm not mistaken. But
it's kind of dark, actually.
It's super dark. Yeah.
But what a cool idea, and like how it shows up in the movie is really cool, and so those are the things that I'll take away, not necessarily, oh wow, I really loved the 3-act structure or the narratives, of this particular film. So. I appreciate it. I admire it, but I didn't love it in the way that I love the other movies I love, necessarily, because it wasn't speaking to what I was hoping for from this particular film. So that's kind of my reaction to the movie. Any other thoughts, or shall we get to spoilers for this one, guys?
I would say, I think a lot of people are seeing it in theaters, but it is definitely worth seeing on a big screen. The sound design is great. The Joe Hisaishi score is fantastic.
Joe Hisaishi, who is a longtime collaborator with Miyazaki. This is like every now and then you hear a film score, you're like, oh, this is how they used to do it. Like this is how they used to do it in like the good way, right? Like
and sound design in general, I think.
Yes.
With
it's
animation,
a completely convincing world.
Yes, with animation, of course, you often forget that every single thing you hear had to be had to be generated for that,
Yeah.
right? And there's so much texture in the sound design of this movie. It's extraordinary.
Mhm.
Indeed. All right.
I'm a little disappointed that I didn't go to the IMAX to see this because I feel like
I
that
wish I
might
could have
be-
gone to the IMAX. Yeah.
It might be a really special experience too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Let's do a few spoilers for The Boy and the Heron, starting right now. We can talk about a few of the more memorable sequences. You know, Jeff, you talked about some of the visuals really sticking with you. I'll just name a few of them. I think everything with Mahito and his mom in the dream area was incredible.
Mhm.
Like he touches his mom, and his mom, like, or his stepmom, starts
Mhm.
like melting.
Yeah. Oh,
And
man.
then when she kind of wakes up and is super angry, and there's all these like this paper or
that paper
cloth.
sequence
It's
is so
unbelievable.
unbelievably animated. Like, how
Yes.
do you even
How do you
do
do that?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's something you expect to see in like a Pixar movie in like 3D animation, but it looks 2D hand drawn. You
Yeah.
know?
And for a lot of anime now too, like everyone is leaning on the 3D CG trend, so they make anime that is essentially like CG animated but looks anime. And this just
there is some of
texture to
that.
this.
There's
Yeah,
some of
there's
that in
some of
this
that
movie.
here.
Yeah,
but
there are
the
like some 3D
texture-
backgrounds and stuff. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
always he's been doing that for a while, but the texture of the actual hand drawn parts is just like
Yeah.
you can't beat that.
Yeah,
it
Yeah.
Can't beat
looks and feels
I
so
could
good.
not believe that. All the bits of paper that are
Yeah.
in the air and moving and twisting around. It's just like, what? How many human hours did that require?
I loved how his stepmother had this group of attendant women
Mhm.
that were like an organism, basically.
They're
like,
funny.
They
Very
moved,
funny.
They're basically
like,
7 dwarves. There are 7
right.
of them.
They
So,
like
yeah.
moved, in kind of concert with each other. They have
Just
their own like unique
love
design.
smoking.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, that was really cool. Love that. And then I'll just throw this out there. A lot of bird shit in the movie. I don't know if you
A lot
guys
of
noticed.
bird shit. The bird shit
Like-
has a point.
Like at the end of the bird shit has a point. So at the very
Yes.
end of the film. Oh, I'll share my interpretation, but I want to hear
Mhm,
Devindra, right? At the end of the film, they escape the dream world, right? And all these birds fly out of the world, and
All
then
the parakeet
the
people
parakeets
become parakeets.
they become parakeets. They're
Yeah.
like large, threatening humanoid creatures in the dream world, but when they enter the real world, they
Little
lose their
veggies.
powers
Yeah.
and they become little parakeets. And as Mahito and his stepmother emerge, all these parakeets are flying out, and they are just getting covered in bird shit, right?
Another sequence where the animation is just
Mhm.
mind-boggling.
Mhm.
All the parakeets on top of each other in this mosh pit of parakeets.
I guess my interpretation of like it takes time to add bird shit to animated films. Like you need somebody
It
needs
has
to
to be there for a reason,
Someone
yeah.
needs to draw the bird shit. So I assumed that it was there to show kind of where the level of their relationship and affection was at. That they didn't even care about the bird shit.
Mhm.
You know, all they care about is each other in that moment, and that's what's important. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm covered in shit. It's the fact that we're together and safe is what's most important. Devindra,
Basically.
does that resonate with you?
I mean, I feel like that's pretty much it. It's also like very much the dream world is not covered in bird shit, even though they're all bird people, right? So like as soon as you hit the real world, the reality of the situation is birds, they don't use the bathrooms. This is just like the state of the world. You have the beauty of the birds, but also the reality of like they shit everywhere because that's what they do when birds fly. Carlos Aguilar over at Inverse wrote a really good piece about that, basically about the idea that a lot of Miyazaki stuff is about like coming back to the real world, away from these fantasy worlds. And the bird shit is very much like, yeah, this is what I choose instead of this potential. I could have been god of a dream world and create whatever I want in it, but he chose to come back to save his stepmother, to live with his baby sibling, like whoever that's going to be, and start this
Back
new
in the
life with his
shit.
father. Back in the shit. That's life, baby.
Yeah.
I also think it's a pretty good gag.
It's funny.
Right? Like
It's
just
hilarious.
on a fundamental sort of gag level, it's like we just showed you a bunch of birds.
This is what
This
birds
is what
do.
it would be,
Yeah. My wife used to have a bird, and it was just awful because it would, if you let it fly around the house, they'll just shit everywhere. That's what they do.
But I think like reading it as a metaphor from Miyazaki's career, right? The idea is that the dream world, I guess, is the world that Miyazaki could just live in. He could just he could live in his own fantasy, but he chooses to live in the real world and share his creativity with us and all the sacrifices and pain that entails. That's right. Is that kind of a way to read it
I
as a
feel like
metaphor?
that's part of it. I mean, you could also read the fantasy world as being Ghibli itself too. Like who once he passes away, like I don't know what's going to happen to the studio. Is the
Mhm.
thing. Like a lot of the other work, the other great author, the other great director whose name I'm forgetting right now, passed away as well. So Ghibli has like Miyazaki's son to take over the mantle, and I eviscerated his last movie because the kid, he's not a kid, he's a full grown man who is living in like a genius's shadow, and I feel really bad for him. But like his stuff hasn't been good. I don't know if there are other underlings at Ghibli that can really like keep the level of imagination alive, but I don't know. You could
I
read
think
it
you're
that
thinking
way
of
too.
Isao Takahata, right?
Takahata, yeah,
Yeah.
Takahata is like he has done a ton of great films as well. A very different level than Miyazaki, tonally and everything,
Great
but
Grave of the Fireflies
yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff
Feel
like that.
like yeah, one of those movies you see it once and you will remember it forever.
Yeah.
But I don't. Ghibli just does not have the talent moving forward, or at least a singular talent. Can they survive as a studio, as a group, or find a new leader or something? I don't know. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of stuff you can read into the Great Uncle thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other sequences or moments you guys feel like worth talking about?
I think we should certainly bring up the fact that they encounter a old gray,
Mhm.
bushy-eyed, eyebrowed creator. I
With a
mean,
beard,
it's hard
yeah.
not to see that as him inserting himself into
Yeah.
the text.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, and his whole thing is who's gonna I can't do this forever, right? Who's gonna take
Who's
over?
going to
And
take over for me?
yeah.
And the
Not my
solution is
son. Have you seen his movies?
oh my
God
god,
damn.
dude,
They're real bad. They're real bad. Have you
Oh my
go see what is it? Mary and the Witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yep.
I'm sure he doesn't feel that way about it, Devindra, as you. But
I'm sure it's
you're
okay.
entitled
It's
to
okay.
you're entitled
You
to your
can joke,
opinion.
and maybe
But
when you see that movie, you will join me on this quest.
okay,
Yeah.
well, I guess what happens with that character is he presents it to Mahito, right? He says, "Hey, I need someone to take over for me," and Mahito says, "Not interested."
No,
Right?
thank
Like,
you.
can't. No, thank. I got other stuff I got to do.
Yeah.
Right? And then the world collapses. That's kind of what happens. So it read that way. He doesn't have a very positive, optimistic viewpoint outlook on where the studio is going after his
I
departure.
don't know. Like he is also like as a person does not have a very optimistic worldview. He kind of like makes these stories
Yeah.
to kind of deliver messages to kids and try to communicate something. But as a person, he's kind of misanthropic too. It's kind of the thing. The movie I was thinking, by the way, was Earwig and the Witch, and you can read my review at Engadget.
I
Goddamn.
want to I want to give a shout out to the Heron's design. I thought it was like a kind of cool.
Mhm.
There's like a little guy sticking out of his throat, and
It's
then
disturbing.
and then when he like goes back in, like the heron kind of like swallows him and
Yeah,
becomes
yeah.
like
And he's
a
like,
normal.
okay, this is regular Sharon
Yeah, he's
shaped again.
Yeah, I kind of appreciated that as well. I thought that was kind of a cool.
You could feel like
cool
at
detail.
times maybe animated by different people too. Like their
Yeah,
characters
yeah.
don't always look the same,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
interesting.
I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Also the opening sequence with the fire, I was shocked. Like a lot of the people on the streets are just like shadows,
Yeah.
like the distorted shadows. Like we have not really seen that imagery in a Ghibli movie, certainly not in a Miyazaki movie. So a lot of the characters too don't look like Miyazaki characters. Like they look more like characters from Evangelion or other shows. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe he can keep if he lets other people do more. Maybe he can still keep creating if he doesn't have to do everything himself. Because this movie took forever to make. He basically started right after they released The Wind Rises, and that was
yeah.
like 13 years ago or a while
I
ago.
believe it, man. The effort
Yeah.
is on the screen. You
Yeah.
know?
I want to ask one last question. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
I was going to ask. I mean, this might be the same question, but I was going to ask you guys what you thought of the final shot of the movie,
Mhm.
which I thought was so powerful.
And describe the final shot for those who don't remember.
The boy basically just walks out the door and leaves an empty room,
Mhm.
and I thought that was really powerful. And if it's the last statement from this artist on the big screen, I think it's kind of a beautiful one.
Yeah.
Mhm. It feels like it doesn't even feel like a big moment. It's just very abrupt, right? His family is like they're downstairs, they're waiting to go. He says, "I'm coming," closes the door, leave, cut to credits. Like we don't even really linger in the room that much. But yeah, it is fascinating.
I like the way it ended. I thought it was a nice ending. I will say there is a moment in the movie. What I was going to bring up, Jeff, was there's a moment in the movie where he starts calling his stepmom mother, which I
Mhm.
think is like supposed to be like the emotional climax of the movie, and I didn't quite get there myself. Like I
Neither
was
did
like,
I.
I want to feel this moment. I want to feel like, wow, what an amazing moment. And the animation is there, like
Yeah.
the way it's drawn and illustrated and animated is there. But I felt narratively, I didn't get to that point where
I
I
I agree.
had
I
that
agree.
catharsis. Yeah,
I don't think that really usually that's the kind of thing that
Mhm.
I would come out feeling really negatively about a movie
right,
for.
right.
But for some reason I didn't. This movie, because like I said, because it was sort of like washing over me on a number of different levels. I wasn't
Mhm.
there emotionally, just like you described, but I still like understood the gravity of that transition for him, and I was still sort of on the wavelength of the movie,
Yeah,
so to
yeah,
speak. You know, I just
yeah.
That's
wasn't
a
emotionally
Yeah,
invested.
Yeah.
intellectually, I was like, "Oh, yes, that's a powerful moment," but, like, emotionally, I didn't
Exactly.
quite
Mhm.
get there.
Yeah.
Devindra, how about you? What'd you think?
Watching some of his stuff, like, you really do have to let it wash over you because it's easy to nitpick. It's easy to be like, "Well, this doesn't really, like, connect together," I guess. But, for me, it was, like, the moments of, like, who is it? The character Himi, who is essentially his mother when she is younger, and she just has the realization at the end. It's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have you someday. You seem pretty cool. That's kinda sweet." And they have a big hug, and that really I found that to be pretty moving, even if it was a little abrupt. So all that stuff, I like those big emotional beats. They still hit for me, even if they're not like didn't fully register emotionally at times. Also all the parakeet stuff, just like the full on. Well, we're gonna have a whole society of life size parakeets, and they're gonna want to eat
But
people,
eat people, yeah.
and they have swords, and they look amazing. They're kind of funny at times too. Like the whole sequence of them knocking out one parakeet after another,
Yeah.
just so good, so good. Yeah.
Alright, folks. Well, at the end of the day, it's really impressive that Miyazaki made a lot of really great movies, of which this is one. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.